Good morning and welcome to Fountain Street Church. My name is Reverend Christopher Rowe, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Minister for Spiritual Life and Learning here at the church. And on behalf of everyone who makes these summer speaker series possible, welcome to worship this morning. We continue with our summer series, and we of course continue with virtual worship together as we welcome Mursalata Muhammad to our summer speaker series this morning. We have a long tradition here at Fountain Street Church of the summer series, and some of that has been logistics and some of it has been a time-honored tradition. But regardless of the reason, we go into this series with gratitude for those who have put it together, not the least of which the Religious Services Committee, and of course those who have given of their time and of course of themselves to offer their words to us during the summer. Thank you to Mursalata. Thank you to the Religious Services Committee. Thank you to everyone else, Danny Hack and Virginia and anybody else who makes these services possible. On behalf of our spread out and yet ever connected community, let me just say how grateful I am that you're with us this morning, watching us on this YouTube live stream. I'm glad you're here. Jesus, tender shepherd, hear me. Bless this little lamb tonight. Through the darkness, be now with me. Keep me safe until morning light. That was my prayer when I was a child. That was the one that was muttered or sped through every night before bed. And sometimes my parents would say, no, go back and do that again. It's funny how we all have those rhythms and those traditions and those rituals. How many of you have a special prayer that might be reminiscent of your childhood or maybe of raising your family? I think in some way, whether it's a spoken prayer or a rhythmic act that comes week after week, we all share that space of rhythm and memory together. Here at Fountain Street Church, we have a whole plural approach to prayer and to meditation, and there is no right or wrong way. What's right is that it is true and authentic to us. And the way is that way which brings us closer to the greater truth in life. Sometimes I find it challenging, if not disingenuous, to offer you a prayer and say, here, these are the words that you need today for your prayer. And so I share little trite stories, or I share my own vulnerabilities and insecurities around prayer. But I hope you know that my hope and undying wish for each of you is that you define and understand prayer and meditation and silence as whatever it needs to be for you, but that it's a gift. That it's a gift for renewal and rejuvenation, and it nurtures your inner life. In a moment, we're going to take the offering. And while that's also a tangible sacrifice of ourselves to the common good of this community, it's also an invitation to sit in the stillness. It only takes a moment to put that gift on the plate, or to text it in, or to call the office and make a gift. But there's an entire period of stillness in which our mind can wander, in which we can look around this beautiful room, or our homes as it may be. And so I invite you to use this space to think about how prayer or silence or stillness or meditation can be a gift to you. Lord knows we all deserve it. With a spirit of generosity in mind, and with a spirit of unity at our hearts as we go into this space together, the offering will now be taken.
Greetings, everyone. Mursalata here, and I want to start by saying thank you for this opportunity to participate in the Fountain Street Church Summer Speaker Series. So, for my talk, I am going to focus on a question that I received from a friend on social media, and I'm gonna walk you back through, me answering this question. When the person asked me the question a month or so ago, I didn't have an answer. And so I've been thinking about that, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to share my answer. So bear with me. So here's a question that I got on social media asking me to share my thoughts about this defunding the police idea. And I know this person, and I am honored that they wanted to know my thoughts. But at the time, I didn't really have any. I just think people were angry and upset, and they're like, let's just defund the police and everything will be better. And so no, I don't think the police should have all of this military grade, and there's things about the reform that needs to change. But I also know not all police departments are funded equally. So it looks like a great idea, but it has to be thought through. And I think we're just talking about money. And whenever we're only talking about money, we're not talking about much. So my response for defunding the police is yes, but what does that really look like? And so my answer is in the form of a reverse timeline. And it starts with looking at the day in the life of Freddie Gray, and actually looking at his life in a little more depth, just a little more. So this is Freddie Gray, and in 2015, he dies at the hands of Baltimore police. The internet and social media, they do a really good job of doing a minute by minute breakdown of that day in April 2015 that the Baltimore police encounter Freddie Gray. So let's look at how this helps me think about giving my friend an answer. This all occurs very quickly, right? So it's 8:39 a.m. on that Sunday. Police are on bikes. They're in a crime area of Baltimore, and they encounter Freddie Gray. And by 8:40, they're calling dispatch to say that they have a person. That person is Freddie Gray. 2 minutes later, they're waiting for the wagon to pull up, and because they're on bikes, so they have to transport Freddie Gray some way. And Freddie asks for an inhaler. That's important. He's asked for an inhaler, so keep that in mind. And 4 minutes later, the driver of the van says Gray is acting irate. So he's taken out of the van. They put leg irons on him. They put him back in his van. And that takes about 8 minutes. So by 8:54, he's back in this van and headed to what they call booking. 4 minutes later, there's a call from the van saying that he's asking for someone to check on Gray. Almost 20 minutes later, emergency services are directed to the now injured patient, and 8:24, paramedics and the police officers request that they take Freddie now to the hospital. By not quite an hour later, he's at the hospital, and responders are saying that he's not breathing. That was that. And then he's reported in a coma. And less than like about a week later, he's dead. Right? So that is what the news media, and that's what we get. And there were riots. Baltimore erupted with yet another young Black man. He was maybe 25 or 26. He's killed at the hands of the police. Oh, now autopsy shows that part of his injuries were, I think, a severed spinal cord and a crushed voice box. All right, so but I'm curious. I'm like, there's more. And I think our calls for defunding the police will say, hey, if the Baltimore police were defunded at this time, maybe this would not have happened. But I want to continue with the timeline. So let's go back, instead of 2015, we're going to go back about 6-7 years earlier. It's 2009, and Freddie Gray is making some comments at a court hearing. And some of those comments that he makes, he tells the courtroom about the place he lived growing up. He says that there was a couple of walls that wasn't painted all the way, peeled, and like the windows, paint was peeling off the windows. He tells us about his sister, that his sister was kind of aggressive. She still has problems. She was always the aggressive one. She liked to fight all the time. As children, and by children I mean not out of high school. Freddie and his sister, this is his twin sister, they were both diagnosed with behavior problems, ADD, ADHD. They both had a hard time in school. Freddie never graduated high school. He was absent a lot. And in his words, he says, all the schools that I went to, I was in special education. So that was 2009 that he's telling us this stuff. 2008, a case is brought on behalf of Freddie and his siblings about lead poisoning. So we're in 2008 and we're looking at this lawsuit. Now let's go back some more years. So between 1992 and 1996, Freddie and his siblings lived in a very poor section of Baltimore, where they rented a place in which there was lead paint, right? And those were some of the things he was talking about. The paint chips flaked off the wall, they littered the floor. They're in this environment. So let's not get lost thinking that, oh, kids have to do something. They don't have to do anything. They just have to be there. They're breathing this stuff in. So how do we defund the police? Do we take their money away so that when this child who has survived childhood grows up and encounters them, that they have a better response? Maybe we need to do something else when we think about defunding the police. So let's continue with the timeline. It's June 1991. Freddie is 22 months old. In his blood, he has 37 micrograms of lead. In August 1990, Freddie is a year old. He has 30 micrograms of lead in his blood. May 1990, Freddie is 9 months old. This is the first time he got tested. He's 9 months old, and he has more than 10 grams of micrograms of lead in his blood. At that time, this is double the amount that the CDC says you need to get tested for. Freddie Gray is born August 16th, 1989. He's born premature. He has to stay in a hospital until he gains enough weight to come home. And yes, the lead is only one of the issues that he has to deal with. He also is born to a mother who's living in a cycle of poverty, and she was a drug user. So that he has that to contend with too. So some of the effects, some of the effects of lead poisoning, it could cause asthma, hence that's probably why he needed an inhaler. If it does cause behavior problems, that too could contribute to why he was a bit irate and anxious and nervous in his encounter in leg shackles with the police 20 some years later. But it also causes diminished capacity of thinking. And with as little as 5 micrograms, apparently, of lead poisoning in a child's blood can cause their brains not to work very well. So if your brain isn't working very well as a child, if you are already in a cycle of survival from birth, I'm not sure what your encounter with law enforcement is going to be when you are an adult. So how do we defund the police? We end childhood poverty. As long as children have to survive childhood, we are going to police them as adults. And if we're going to defund the police, we need to defund by not making our children predisposed as adults to lifestyles and choices that results in the case of Freddie Gray. This is not a simple solution. This is a very difficult defunding process. And how much is it going to cost us? Well, according to one source, I think it's the Children's Defense Fund, it will cost us about $52 billion a year to end childhood poverty. Well, that sounds like a lot of money. Well, not really. So for $52 billion a year, according to the Children's Defense Fund report, we could shrink childhood poverty by 57%, Black childhood poverty by 65%, and we can improve the lives of 95% of all poor children for the cost of $52 billion a year. All right, so research gives us some ways of doing this. This is like so much money, right? No, not really. So here's some ways we could think about how do we end childhood poverty and defund the police in a way that actually makes our world, our lives, our neighborhoods a better place. So, well, one of the first things that we could do is we could tax the accumulated wealth of the top 0.1% of Americans. 0.1% of Americans, right? And we can do that at 25% each year. That's one thing you can do. Now, it's not the only thing we can do. It's just one of the things we could do. The second thing they suggest we might do is restore the top individual tax rate to 39.6% and raise the corporate, yes, I said it, the corporate tax rate from 21 to 25%. Or, so these are not ands, these are different options. Or we can eliminate the tax breaks for the wealthy by taxing capital gains and dividends at the same rate as wages. This, according to the research, would save $130 billion a year. We need $52 billion a year to end childhood poverty, to defund the police, to make it so that children live childhoods and not survive it. And the last option that they give us is, how about this crazy idea? Decrease 10% of the nation's military budget. 10%, which in 2019 was $686 billion. 10%. Now that all sounds great, yes, but that's all like at the national level. Like it's big, it's up here. How are we gonna? We'll get there. But right now we're talking about defunding the police, and if we're talking about doing that here in Grand Rapids or here wherever you are locally, yeah, maybe you do need to look at how much of your city's budget is going to the police and compare that to how many children are surviving childhood. And how will defunding the police alleviate for as many children as possible the need to survive childhood? We defund the police by making childhood livable, because broken children, children who spend their formative years trying to find food, trying to stave off physical attacks, trying to preserve enough of their developmental ability so that they can learn in school, do not grow up into adults who can contribute what we need as a society. So we defund the police by ending childhood poverty. What does this look like here in Grand Rapids? Well, an article that I pulled from just 2 years ago said that, at least in one zip code, and it's just looking at one zip code here in Grand Rapids, that a report showed that there was an increase by 40% in childhood lead poisoning in that one zip code in 2 years. So if we defund the Grand Rapids police, how do we do that in a way that makes childhood something that the children in Grand Rapids no longer survive, that they live? And I say this only using one of the obstacles that children have to survive, right? Just lead poisoning. We're not talking about all of the other consequences of being poor and being locked in a cycle of poverty, all those other obstacles that children have to overcome. We simply cannot ever expect that our children are going to grow up and not be adults that we're going to have to police. So my answer to my friend's question, should we defund the police? And I say, yes, we should. However, as long as children have to survive childhood, we will never defund the police. Thank you for bearing with me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
My friends, I don't think that this virtual way of being community will ever feel right, but I think that our sense of normalcy is slowly but ever surely being redefined. And so I'm so grateful to all of you who continue to call this your spiritual home and who continue to call this part of your Sunday morning, week after week, a part of your spiritual life. Thank you to Mursalata, thank you to Danny Heck, and thank you to the Religious Services Committee once again for bringing us this series. And thank you to you, all of you, who continue to commit yourselves and pledge of yourselves to Fountain Street Church. Until we meet again, be safe, stay resilient, remain healthy, and know that you are loved by myself and everyone here at Fountain Street Church. Go in peace and have a wonderful week, everyone.